tremendous uncertainty out there in the business community. As a matter of fact, in talking to one of our leading economists last night, corporate balance sheets today are flush with cash, but companies are unwilling to invest that cash in long-term assets because they're concerned about here in Washington what we're going to do. They're concerned about whether we as a country are going to actually deal with our debt ceiling, deal with our indebtedness in a way that makes progress. So there's tremendous uncertainty out there. That is, in my opinion, one of the leading causes of the economic issues we're dealing with, the high unemployment. It's been 777 days since this body even passed a budget. And if you can imagine having a country like ours with 535 people in the House and Senate spending money without a budget for that long, obviously it's a display of incredible lack of discipline and certainly sends the wrong signal to the business community. So I do think that our country is suffering economically. Every person that I talk to is concerned about the uncertainty of whether we as a country are going to be able to deal with our indebtedness, the tremendous amount of debt this country is piling up because we're spending money that we don't have. I do look at this August 2nd deadline as a line in the sand for us as a country. There's plenty of time for us between now, June 15th, and August 2nd, to actually come to an agreement on these big issues. And, Mr. President, one of the things that I hope will be a part of anything we do is something like the fiscal straitjacket that the CAP Act outlines. I don't think there's anybody in this body that disagrees with the fact that we as a country are spending money that we don't have and more money than we should. As a country, we have spent about 20.6% of our country's gross domestic product for the last 40 years. That's the post-entitlement period. Today as a country, we're spending almost 25% of our country's economic output on the federal government, and that number is rising geometrically. So we've put forth a bill. It's called the CAP Act. Again, it has bipartisan support in the Senate, bipartisan support in the House that would take us over a 10-year period down to the 40-year average and save our country about $7.6 trillion over what's called the alternative fiscal scenario as printed by CBO. Mr. President, there is no doubt in my mind, and I don't think there's anybody in this body that would disagree with this, that the signals that we're sending to the country and the world about our inability to come to a conclusion around our spending is affecting the economy. I can't imagine there's anybody that would disagree with that. I mean, we've had people come in, economists telling us what will happen if we don't raise the debt ceiling, what will happen if we do, and we don't do those things that are necessary to lower the amount of spending that's taking place here in Washington. So again, I've offered something that's practical. People on both sides of the aisle have joined in. I know there are discussions that are taking place. They're called the Blair House negotiations between the Vice President and members of this body. And I'm understanding that a fiscal straitjacket is part of that discussion. In other words, making sure that over the next 10 years, whatever cost that we cut are actually locked in and more cuts are gotten through the imposition, if you will, of a declining fiscal straitjacket where we, in essence, get back to the norm as it relates to spending and our economy in this country. So, Mr. President, I want to say that I think one of the greatest things we can do to actually spur the economy, as much as people care about spending in this country today, and there are a lot of people that do, believe it or not, they care, as they should, even more right now about the economy and their own family situation. And I think these two are intertwined. And I think that if we as a body were to show fiscal discipline, show some certainty into the future, so the business community and the world community that we have the ability to have discipline, to act responsibly, I believe it would unleash tremendous amounts of investment in this country. Again, leading economist last night says he's never seen a situation where this much cash resides on corporate balance sheets, but corporations are unwilling to invest them in long-term assets. What that means, what that translates into, is they're not building plants, they're not expanding, because they are concerned about policies in Washington, one of which is, can we control our spending? So, Mr. President, I do think that August 2nd is a seminal moment in our country's history. There's nothing happening here in the Senate, let's face it. I mean, we're voting on judges that we don't even need to vote on. We could pass them out of here by unanimous consent. We have bills on the floor that mean nothing, that are never going to become law, just to fill up time. We know that. It's got to be the most boring time in the world for a presiding officer. Nothing is happening. The oxygen is taken out of the room over this debt issue, and we're debating things that are never going to happen. It's almost a farce in many ways. So there is plenty of time, it's June 15th, for us to negotiate something that's meaningful as it relates to cuts. And certainly plenty of time to act, to put something in place like the CAP Act as part of the overall need to reform our entitlements and make sure that they're here for future generations. Let me just state one more time, I feel like in many ways, Mr. President, that what we're reading in the media about these negotiations is almost a walking down of expectations. In other words, most of us really want to see something big happen for this country. We see this as a true seminal moment for our country. But what I read is the various snippets that are coming out of these discussions. It's almost intended to just each day sort of tamp down what our expectations are. I just want to say to everybody in this body, unless I see dramatic changes in spending as a result of these negotiations, I absolutely will not vote for this debt ceiling increase. If we're going to have a calamity in this country, and there's economists who say we're going to have a calamity either way, in other words, if we don't act responsibly and pass a debt ceiling, we're going to send a signal to world markets that we don't have the ability to control spending. If we don't raise the debt ceiling, there are those that will say there's going to be a calamity. Here's what I would say. I'm 58 years old. I came to this body because I wanted to solve our country's problems or be a part of that, working with others. I want to say, Mr. President, I want to go on the record that I'd rather us have a calamity this summer on my watch while I'm here so I can deal with it than I would to pass a debt ceiling and not do something that dramatically alters our fiscal situation in the country and pass it along to someone else who may come behind me. I think there's a lot of sentiment in that regard. I hope there's a lot of sentiment in that regard that all of us would bear the brunt of irresponsibility while we're here, then pass it on down the road. So, Mr. President, I'm here to talk about a component of a solution, which is the CAP Act. There may be some variation of this that makes more sense. Certainly, I have no monopoly on wisdom. But I hope that something like this, if it's not exactly the CAP Act as written, is a component of the negotiations. I know we're actually, during these negotiations, this is actually being discussed, meaning how we cap spending and actually put Congress in a fiscal straitjacket, for lack of a better word. But, Mr. President, this is a seminal moment. I hope that we will not water down expectations. I hope we will rise to the occasion. And as the senator from Illinois mentioned, deal with this in a responsible way. And I hope very, very soon we'll actually have a debate on this floor about what it is that's actually been arrived at, what the deal is, so we can actually talk about it in a responsible way and do those things that we all know are very important to our country, very important to our country's solvency, and certainly very important to all those Americans out there who are uncertain as to whether the heads of households who provide such great opportunities for those people coming under them have the opportunity for good-paying jobs. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.